Officer Harlan Graves believed in one thing above all else, his own invincibility. Clad in his starched uniform, baton resting at his hip, he roamed the streets of Chicago with a swagger that oozed entitlement. People often stepped aside when they saw him coming, more out of fear than respect. For years, Harlan had basked in this unearned sense of power. It showed in the way he spoke to people, always a shade condescending, and in the suspicious glances he reserved exclusively for minorities. Whenever someone pointed out his bias, he shrugged it off as them being too sensitive. One afternoon, Harlan parked himself outside a corner store in an economically challenged neighborhood on the south side, sipping from a plastic cup of cheap coffee. Through the patrol car window, he eyed passersby as though every single one of them was a potential criminal. His partner, Officer Derek Shaw, tried to focus on paperwork but could not ignore the tension thickening inside the car. Harlan's gaze hunted the street until he saw her. Imani Brooks, a vibrant 27-year-old black woman with bright eyes and a confident stride, carried a small grocery bag. She was on her way home after picking up a few items for her mother, Lorraine, who had recently been discharged from Mount Sinai Hospital. Imani had made this trip countless times, yet she was about to walk straight into the snare of a man who found her very existence suspicious. Harlan had no legitimate reason to stop her. No crime had been reported, and she was doing nothing wrong. Still, he decided to follow her anyway, prodding Derek to back him up. Derek sighed, a quiet protest Harlan ignored. As the cruiser pulled closer, Imani's head turned. She noticed the patrol car trailing her too slowly and felt her nerves tighten. In her experience, this kind of stalking never ended well. Harlan stopped the car and stepped out. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice dripping with a courtesy that was more mockery than politeness. Imani's eyes flicked from Derek to Harlan. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly, her grip on the grocery bag tightening. He scanned her, fists on his hips. "Mind if I see some identification?" Imani hesitated, confused. "Why do you need my ID?" Harlan tilted his head, feigning patience. "Is that a problem?" Derek, standing a few feet away, looked visibly uncomfortable. He knew this was not protocol. Imani was not a suspect and had done nothing to warrant suspicion. Yet Harlan's silent bigotry simmered just beneath the surface. Imani's voice stayed steady. "I don't have a problem showing it, but I'd like to know why." Her calm questions set him off. He took her confidence as defiance. "You want to be difficult? Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Derek's eyes widened. "Harlan, come on. This isn't necessary." But Harlan was already too far gone, consumed by a self-righteousness that convinced him Imani was challenging his authority. Before she could fully grasp what was happening, she felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap around her wrists. In that sharp, humiliating moment, the full weight of his prejudice crashed over her. He read out some vague, trumped-up charge that she was resisting investigation. Imani's heart pounded. Hot tears stung her eyes, not from fear, but from the sheer injustice of it all. Pedestrians stopped to watch. Some pulled out phones and began recording. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't get to treat me like this." Harlan snapped back with cold authority. In that instant, her life pivoted. She was pushed into the back of the patrol car while Derek offered a half-hearted apology that could never erase the trauma. The entire scene, thick with tension and raw bigotry, became a turning point for both Imani and Harlan. A chain of events had begun, and the wheels of justice had started to turn, even if he could not yet hear them grinding. The cold, grimy cell reeked of stale sweat and sorrow. Through the bars, Imani saw other women huddled in corners, some lost in hopelessness, others simply trying to survive another sleepless night. Her mind spun. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, locked away. She could still feel the sting of the handcuffs that had cut into her wrists. Faint red marks remained, silent reminders of how quickly injustice could shatter an ordinary life. Embarrassment and fury churned inside her. She tried to hold her composure, but the reality pressed down like a heavy stone. A police officer eventually handed her a phone. Her heart lifted for a moment. She dialed her mother's number. No answer. The voicemail beep sounded colder than the cell itself. Lorraine's phone was probably on silent after her recent hospital stay. Imani tried a few friends. No one picked up. She left hurried voicemails, her voice cracking. "Hey, it's me. I need help. Please call back." She handed the phone back, and the officer walked away without a word. Imani sat on the bench and hugged herself tightly. Anxiety turned to adrenaline, then to a shivering fury. This should never have happened. Meanwhile, Harlan stood at the front desk bragging to other officers, twisting the story into a tall tale of Imani acting erratic. Derek stood in the corner, arms folded, quietly furious. He wanted to speak up, but was too intimidated by Harlan's swagger. Harlan was known to retaliate against anyone who questioned him. He would sabotage careers with false statements or petty revenge. Derek knew the right thing was to blow the whistle, yet fear kept him silent. Eventually, Imani received another phone call. This time she reached her cousin, Simone, a law student at the University of Chicago. "Simone, please pick up," she whispered. Relief flooded her when Simone answered on the third ring. Imani explained everything in a rush, her voice shaking. "Arrested? For what?" Simone exclaimed. "I don't even know," Imani said, tears welling. "He just cuffed me like I was some kind of criminal." Simone's righteous anger flared. She promised to get to work immediately and contacted a colleague interning at a local civil rights law firm. Imani knew she could count on her cousin's tenacity. Time moved slowly. Imani was processed and fingerprinted. She was told she would have to stay overnight because her bail hearing would not happen until the following morning. When the guard clanged the bars shut for lights out, only the silent darkness kept her company. She replayed the day in her mind. The routine grocery run turned into public humiliation. The sidewalk spectacle, the phones capturing her shame. She made a quiet vow that once this nightmare ended, she would fight so no one else would have to endure it. Across the station, Harlan filled out paperwork with a smug grin. In his mind, Imani was just another troublemaker who had stepped out of line. He never stopped to wonder if he was wrong or whether he might face consequences. The system had protected him before. He assumed it always would. He had no idea that beyond the dull fluorescent lights of that station, Imani's calls for help were already setting larger forces in motion. Imani's bail hearing was brief. Her legal team, led by attorney Diego Morales from a local nonprofit dedicated to ending police misconduct, had filed the necessary paperwork. She was released on a small bail. The moment she stepped into the gray morning light, she felt a rush of relief. Yet the weight of the injustice still clung to her like a damp coat. Diego introduced himself properly and explained they were going to fight this together. "We have people who will rally behind you," he said, voice steady and resolute. Lorraine stood nearby, leaning on a cane, her face etched with worry. "I can't believe this," she murmured, shaking her head. "That officer just took you." Imani nodded, exhaustion clear in her eyes, but a spark of determination burned there too. "He arrested me for no reason, Mama. We can't let him get away with it." Word of the arrest had already spread through the neighborhood. Social media posts from bystanders, accompanied by short video clips, painted a damning portrait of Harlan's behavior. It was not the first time his actions had been questioned. A few months earlier, he had been under investigation for excessive force, though nothing had come of it then. Imani's case could change that. As Diego led Imani toward his car, a middle-aged man in casual clothes called out, "Excuse me, Miss Brooks." Imani turned, warmth and quiet empathy shone in his eyes. "I saw what happened yesterday," he said, voice a little unsteady. "I was one of the people recording. I just want you to know I gave the footage to the local news. They might be contacting you." He glanced at Diego nervously. "I'm sorry about what happened. I hope it helps in some way." Imani paused, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, really." He nodded and walked away. A flicker of hope stirred inside her. People were paying attention. This was bigger than her alone. Diego dropped Imani and her mother at their small apartment on the second floor of a red brick complex. It was not fancy, but it was home. Lorraine insisted Imani rest, yet adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She paced the living room, calling friends and acquaintances, anyone who might help gather witnesses or donate to legal fees. That night, she posted her story on social media, describing the ordeal in gripping detail. Within hours, the post began circulating and earning thousands of shares. The hashtag Justice for Imani trended locally. Soon, local news outlets were calling for interviews, eager to shine a spotlight on Harlan's misconduct. In a modest home across town, Derek scrolled through the rising backlash. Anxiety tightened in his chest. He knew Imani was telling the truth, but he also knew Harlan would retaliate if he backed her publicly. Torn between moral duty and fear for his career, Derek chose to remain silent, at least for now. Harlan, on the other hand, scoffed at the uproar. He spent the evening at a local bar joking with off-duty colleagues about how the social justice warriors were out to get him. He bragged that the department brass would protect him the way they always had. His confidence grew louder, turning into a toxic brand of arrogance. Beyond the neon lights of that dive bar, however, Amani and her new allies were already building a case no one could turn away from. As news of the arrest spread, Chicago's local outlets ran footage of it on repeat, spliced with Amani's emotional interviews. People from across the city began showing support. Hashtags calling out the long history of racial profiling in law enforcement sprang up across social media. Imani's phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, attorneys, activists, and strangers offering support or sharing their own stories. Overwhelmed by the media storm, she leaned on Diego and Simone to navigate the surge of attention. Lorraine, though still fragile from her hospital stay, insisted on standing beside her daughter during every interview. One request stood out. A local affiliate of a major national network asked Imani to appear on a morning show segment. With nerves swirling, she agreed. The station sent a car at dawn. Inside the glossy studio, she was ushered under bright lights while a sympathetic makeup artist powdered her face. The host introduced her as the young woman at the center of a police misconduct case that had captured the city's attention. Imani sat up straight, cleared her throat, and began. She recounted the arrest, her voice trembling at times, yet never losing its strength. She spoke not only about her own experience, but about the broader issue of institutional racism within the police department. As she spoke, the studio audience nodded, some shedding tears. When the interview aired, viewers were struck by her resolve. She was not a nameless victim. She was a daughter, a caretaker, and she had been humiliated in public simply because of one officer's prejudice. Her words ignited conversations around dinner tables, in classrooms, and across social media about accountability and the need for systemic reform. City Hall took notice. A small but vocal group of city council members demanded an investigation into Harlan's conduct. Activist groups began organizing peaceful protests in front of police headquarters. Public pressure mounted for the department to fire him. Inside the police department, tension soared. Some officers sided with Harlan, believing Imani's case was just another anti-police crusade. Others, especially those who had long suspected his unsavory tactics, began to speak out. Derek felt the pressure intensely, his conscience warring with his instinct for self-preservation. Harlan scoffed at the notion that he would be held accountable. He received calls of solidarity from longtime friends, some of whom peddled conspiracy theories that Imani was being used by the liberal media. His older brother repeatedly urged him to stay strong and not give an inch. With each call, Harlan's conviction that he was the victim of a witch hunt only hardened. Yet beneath the bravado, small cracks appeared in his sense of invulnerability. He noticed suspicious looks from fellow officers he once bullied. Even Derek had grown distant. The lieutenant had warned him to keep his nose clean until internal affairs finished their investigation. Worst of all, swirling rumors suggested the district attorney's office was considering criminal charges. At home, Imani could barely sleep. Her mind swirled with depositions, news crews, and legal procedures. Still, she took heart in the growing support and reminded herself she was not alone. Late one evening, while scrolling through social media, she encountered a barrage of hateful comments calling her a liar and worse. Tears welled, but she steeled herself. She had to stay strong, not just for herself, but for everyone fighting alongside her. She realized a long, arduous battle lay ahead, yet she also sensed something monumental was shifting. The city was waking up, and so was the system. Though it moved slowly, the machinery of justice was churning forward. Harlan was about to learn that when the tide of public opinion turns, it can sweep a person under before they even realize they are drowning. The gray corridors of the Internal Affairs Division felt a world away from the bustling main precinct. Harlan sat in a sparse waiting room, flipping through outdated magazines, his foot tapping anxiously. He had been summoned for a formal interview. Inside a small office, two investigators waited. Sergeant Naomi Ellis and Lieutenant Victor Lang. Both had spent years peeling back layers of corruption and misconduct. They had seen officers lie, twist facts, and double down on wrongdoing. This case felt different, partly because of the overwhelming public attention. "Officer Graves, come in," Sergeant Ellis said evenly. Harlan walked in, face expressionless, and took a seat across from them, ignoring the camera mounted in the corner. The interrogation began politely enough. Sergeant Ellis asked him to recount the events leading to Imani's arrest. He stuck to the script he had concocted. Imani had been loitering, acting nervous, and refusing to show identification. "And you believe she was involved in suspicious activity?" Lieutenant Lang followed up, eyebrows raised. "Absolutely," Harlan insisted, leaning forward. She was clearly agitated. "I had reason to believe she might be carrying something illegal." Sergeant Ellis glanced at the file, then met his gaze. "We have multiple witness statements and video recordings suggesting Miss Brooks was calm and cooperative." Harlan's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Sergeant, witnesses can be biased. People want to paint the police as villains these days." A tense silence followed. Sergeant Ellis let out a slow breath, then slid a photograph across the table. A still image from one of the videos showing Imani holding up her grocery bag with a puzzled expression. Next to her, Derek looked visibly unsure. The shot was taken right before Harlan slammed the handcuffs on her wrists. "Is this the moment you say she resisted?" Sergeant Ellis asked. Harlan swallowed. His gaze flickered to the photograph, then back to her. "Yes, she refused to let me check her bag." Lieutenant Lang scribbled a note. "Did you have probable cause?" Harlan hesitated only for a second, but it was enough. "Yes," he finally blurted. "She was acting strangely." Sergeant Ellis and Lieutenant Lang exchanged knowing looks. They had encountered many officers who had grown too comfortable flexing their authority. Harlan's answers carried the same hollow ring they had heard countless times. When the questioning ended, Harlan stalked out, muttering to himself. Despite his bravado, the seeds of uncertainty had taken root. Meanwhile, Imani and Diego prepared for the next phase, filing a formal lawsuit. They gathered testimonies from witnesses to the arrest and even managed to track down Derek, who reluctantly agreed to meet after Diego reminded him of his responsibility as a sworn officer to tell the truth. In a hushed corner of a coffee shop, Derek fiddled nervously with a paper cup. "Look, Harlan, he's not a great guy, but the department is protective of its own," he said, glancing around to make sure no one recognized him. Diego leaned forward. "We don't need you to trash the department, Officer Shaw. We need you to tell the truth about what happened that day." Derek's eyes darted toward Imani, who looked at him with quiet intensity. He swallowed hard. "He had no reason to arrest you. None at all. I was there and I'm sorry." Imani's heart pounded. This was confirmation from Harlan's own partner. It felt like validation for the trauma she had suffered, though it could never erase the indignity. Still, it was an important step toward justice. That night, as Imani prepared for bed, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She pictured Harlan, probably at home, stewing over the possibility of losing his badge. Part of her felt a surge of righteous anger. Another part felt sadness. Sadness that racism could poison a person so thoroughly and ruin multiple lives in the process. One thing was certain. Internal affairs was only the beginning. Soon there would be a trial, and if rumors were true, Imani would not be the only one confronting Harlan. There was another figure looming in the background who would eventually enter the scene, a judge with a complicated history and a personal score to settle. Judge Darius Langston wore his black robe with quiet pride. He had worked tirelessly to earn his position, navigating a legal system that was not always welcoming to someone who looked like him. As one of the few black judges in his circuit, he bore the weight of expectations from those who cheered his presence and from those who resented it. He had seen it all: petty criminals caught in cycles of poverty, white-collar offenders who believed they were untouchable, and people from every walk of life who landed in his courtroom. Over time, he had learned to read a person's character even before they spoke. But there was one face he had never forgotten: Harlan Graves. Years earlier, when Darius was still a public defender, he had clashed with a younger Harlan in a minor assault case. Harlan had testified against Darius's client, and in the hallway outside the courtroom they exchanged words. Harlan had flung an ugly slur, mocking Darius's drive to defend his own kind. The hatred in Harlan's eyes that day had rattled Darius to his core, though he never let it show. The judge's mind often drifted back to that incident, if only to remind himself why he fought so hard to uphold the law with fairness. Every time a lawyer, defendant, or fellow judge doubted him because of his skin color, Darius dug deeper into his convictions. He refused to let prejudice tarnish his commitment to justice. So when he saw Imani Brooks's case on his docket, A cold shiver ran through him. The name Harlan Graves, slated to be the defendant in a civil rights lawsuit and potentially facing criminal charges, jumped off the page. For a moment, Darius's professionalism warred with the memory of that hallway confrontation. He called a recess in his current case to collect himself. At his desk, he stared at the official documents outlining Imani's lawsuit. Unlawful arrest, use of excessive force, violation of civil rights. The list of allegations was long, and Imani's legal team was formidable, including pro bono lawyers from civil rights organizations. Darius pressed his fingertips together and breathed deeply. This was more than a high-profile case. It was personal, whether he liked it or not. Yet he knew the ethical boundaries he had to maintain. He could not let his feelings toward Harlan overshadow the fairness he was sworn to uphold. That night, after the courthouse emptied and the cleaning staff roamed the halls, Darius remained in his office. He sifted through case files, reading Imani's testimony, the witness statements, and Derek's account. The more he read, the more a familiar outrage flickered in his chest. Harlan's prejudice had gone unchecked for too long. Yet Darius also felt a measure of cautious hope. Here, at last, was an opportunity for accountability. The system, so often criticized for failing to protect those it should, might finally take a stand. And as fate would have it, he was in a position to shepherd that process. Little did Harlan Graves know that the judge overseeing his case was the very man he had once insulted in the corridors of justice. Darius had reason to recuse himself, perhaps, but for now he saw no direct conflict, only his duty. He was prepared to stay on. He would administer the law impartially and let the evidence speak. But the stage was set for an extraordinary confrontation, one that would challenge both Darius's commitment to impartiality and Harlan's sense of invincibility. Meanwhile, Imani Brooks, the courageous plaintiff at the center of it all, had no idea her quest for justice would soon intersect with a judge who carried his own scars from Harlan's bigotry. The pretrial hearing arrived and the courthouse buzzed with energy. Supporters of Imani and advocates for police accountability filled the seating area. On the other side, a smattering of off-duty officers showed up in solidarity with Harlan, a testament to the deep divisions within the department. Imani sat with Diego and Simone, her heart pounding like a drum. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her, yet she refused to back down. Lorraine sat behind her, frail but resolute, her hand gently gripping her daughter's shoulder. When Harlan walked in, flanked by his defense attorney, a hush fell over the courtroom. He glanced at Imani with a sneer. Then his gaze moved to the bench where Judge Darius Langston adjusted his robe. For a fleeting moment, recognition flashed in Harlan's eyes. Darius could see it. He watched as Harlan swallowed, a scowl flickering across his face. It was clear Harlan remembered him too. The proceedings began with opening statements about the nature of the case. Diego spoke eloquently about Imani's rights being violated and the systemic issue of racially biased policing. Harlan's attorney countered with a claim that Imani had been combative and that Harlan had merely followed proper procedure. From the bench, Darius listened intently. His face remained neutral, but inside his thoughts raced. He noted how Harlan's attorney tried to downplay the witness statements, insinuating that community members had banded together to smear an officer's reputation. Darius's gaze moved briefly to Imani, who sat upright, eyes resolute. Outside, rain began to pour. Dark clouds rolled in, thunder rattling the courthouse windows. It felt like a reflection of the tension inside. When the hearing concluded, the attorneys shuffled out with their teams, setting a date for the official trial. Imani, enveloped by reporters, reiterated her calls for accountability. Meanwhile, Harlan's lawyer hurried him past the cameras. Still, microphones caught fragments of Harlan's muttered tirade against the media circus. Judge Darius Langston lingered in his chambers. The storm outside raged, lightning illuminating the skyline, and he stared out the window. He felt the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. This was not just another case. It was a potential landmark in the fight against police misconduct, and the defendant was the embodiment of an ugliness Darius had experienced firsthand. Suddenly his phone buzzed. It was a message from a former colleague in the public defender's office. "I see you're overseeing the Graves case. Be careful. He's got some powerful friends." Darius exhaled and set the phone aside. He knew the stakes were high. The city was watching. Activists were marching. The media was covering every angle, and behind the scenes there were likely forces that would prefer to see this case buried. Yet Darius found a steely sense of calm within himself. He would follow the law. He would weigh the evidence. He would do what he had always done: be fair, be just. If Harlan was innocent, so be it. If he was guilty, he would face the consequences. Little did anyone know that the trial would unearth more than just the question of one wrongful arrest. Secrets would come to light, reputations would be on the line, and the entire city of Chicago would feel the tremors of the truth. The storm was only beginning to gather. As Amani's story gained traction, it found its way onto a popular talk show hosted by Oprah Winfrey's production team. They highlighted her ordeal and the growing movement against racial profiling in a community-focused episode. Almost overnight, national attention soared. Messages of solidarity poured in from across the country. Well-known civil rights activists mentioned Amani's case on their social media platforms, sharing snippets of her arrest footage. Celebrities offered to pay her legal fees. It was a whirlwind Amani never anticipated. But with the support came intense scrutiny. Harlan's backers, mostly anonymous voices online, escalated their harassment. Amani's email inbox brimmed with racist rants accusing her of seeking fame. She was doxxed, her personal information splashed across hate-filled forums. Some messages contained vague threats, telling her she would regret taking on the police. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders. One evening, Diego and Simone dropped by her apartment. They found Amani pacing anxiously while Lorraine tried in vain to calm her. "I'm scared," Amani confessed, tears brimming. "These people hate me and I don't know what they might do." Diego gently guided her to sit down. "Listen, Amani, we need to contact the police about these threats." Amani's breath hitched. The thought of relying on the same institution that had wronged her felt twisted. Still, she knew the threats were serious. "All right," she whispered, "but I want to talk to Derek. He's the only officer I trust right now." That call was awkward but necessary. Derek listened quietly, expressing genuine concern. The next day, Amani filed a report at a different precinct, and they assigned a detective to look into the threats. It was a surreal experience, turning to law enforcement to protect her from other law enforcement supporters. Meanwhile, more people stepped up to help. A local church organized a prayer vigil for Amani. Grassroots organizations rallied around her, stating that the fight against racism in policing was bigger than one person. They printed T-shirts, ran fundraising campaigns, and turned Amani's arrest into a rallying cry for systemic reform. Among the supportive voices, one message stood out. A handwritten letter arrived from an older woman in Texas whose grandson had also been the victim of racial profiling. "Keep going," the letter said in neat cursive. "Don't let the hate wear you down. The future depends on brave souls like you." Amani read that letter every night before bed, letting its sincerity soothe her nerves. The fear lingered, but determination burned brighter. If she backed down now, what message would that send to the countless others who had experienced similar injustices? Meanwhile, Judge Darius Langston watched the developments from afar. He saw the news segments, read the op-eds, and quietly prepared for a trial that would be anything but ordinary. Reporters questioned whether he should recuse himself, given that he was one of the few African-American judges in the circuit. Some speculated that he might be biased against Harlan. Darius kept his composure, refusing to be swayed by the sensationalism. He had a job to do: uphold the law. Harlan, for his part, grew more irate by the day. The support Amani received seemed to him like a personal vendetta orchestrated by an entire city. He drank more, picking fights with random patrons at bars. The friction at work intensified too. Colleagues who once feared him now openly avoided him. The department placed him on administrative leave, taking his badge and gun. Harlan stewed, blaming Amani for his downfall, never once acknowledging that his own actions had lit the spark. As the trial date neared, the lines were drawn. On one side stood Amani, armed with the truth and backed by a rising wave of public support. On the other stood Harlan, bolstered by legal defense and determined to prove that Amani's arrest was justified. At the center of it all was Judge Darius Langston, prepared to turn the wheels of justice, no matter how squeaky they might be. What no one knew yet was just how many hidden cards would be played in that courtroom, and how the final outcome would redefine the meaning of accountability for an entire city. When the trial began, the courthouse corridors buzzed with reporters, legal interns, and spectators eager to witness the high-profile case. Carlos and Renee ushered Amani through the throng, shielding her from intrusive cameras. A hush fell as they entered the packed courtroom. Judge Darius Langston took his seat, regal in his robe. He scanned the room, noting the tension etched on every face. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, the gravity of his voice rippling through the rows. Arguments began with Diego painting a vivid picture of Amani's unlawful arrest. He highlighted the systemic pattern of misconduct, weaving witness testimonies and video evidence into a tapestry of injustice. Harlan's defense lawyer countered, insisting Amani had been defiant and that Harlan was simply doing his job under dangerous conditions. Then the prosecution's first major revelation came. Derek Shaw took the stand. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Harlan stared at his former partner, eyes filled with anger. Derek swallowed hard and began his testimony. He recounted the events of that day, leaving no doubt that Amani had done nothing wrong. Then he elaborated, hesitating only a second before unleashing a series of revelations about Harlan's history. "I've witnessed him stop people without cause before," Derek admitted, voice wavering. "There were instances he'd mock or belittle suspects based on their race." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Amani's heart hammered. She glanced at Harlan, who was now gripping the edge of the defense table, knuckles white. The defense attorney tried to discredit Derek's testimony, suggesting he was disgruntled or seeking attention. But Derek held firm, backed by years of meticulous internal logs he had secretly kept. The biggest shock came when Derek revealed a time Harlan planted evidence on a suspect, an incident he had been too afraid to report until now. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of Harlan's reliability. Judge Langston remained calm, though Amani could sense the tension simmering behind his measured gaze. During a break, Amani's hands trembled as she cradled a cup of water. "He planted evidence," she whispered, hardly believing the lengths of corruption they were unearthing. Diego nodded, acknowledging that this could be the turning point. If Derek's testimony was believed, it would not just condemn Harlan. It might expose deeper rot in the department. In the hallway outside, Harlan's lawyer cornered him. Their whispers were furious and hushed. If one looked closely, one might see Harlan's face flushed, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Gone was the cocky smirk he once wore. He was realizing, perhaps too late, that he stood at the precipice of losing it all. Meanwhile, at a table near the vending machines, Judge Darius Langston sipped black coffee, ignoring curious stares. His mind replayed Harlan's racial slur from years ago, the hatred in the man's eyes. But Darius pushed those personal memories aside, focusing on what he had heard in the courtroom. Derek Shaw's testimony was damning, yes, but it would need corroboration. Additional witnesses testified to Harlan's pattern of harassment. Some were tearful, others defiant, but their stories carried a haunting consistency. Imani felt tears slip down her cheeks as each one recounted the same heavy-handed approach, the same contempt for minorities. By the end of that phase of the trial, the once rock-solid defense of just another routine arrest was shredded. Harlan sat hunched in his seat, rage and fear warring across his face. Imani dared to feel the stirrings of hope. For the first time, she sensed that Harlan might actually be held responsible. As people filed out of the courtroom, Judge Langston remained on the bench, gathering his notes. His eyes drifted to where Harlan had been seated, the same man who had once insulted him for defending a black client. Darius inhaled slowly, releasing a silent prayer for balance. He would not allow personal vengeance to corrupt his judgment. Yet he could not deny the sense that something monumental was shifting, and that Harlan's day of reckoning was finally at hand. As the trial continued, the defense team came out swinging. They tried to undermine Derek Shaw's credibility, digging into his background to find any sign of misconduct. They claimed Derek was a cowardly officer who had caved under public pressure to betray a fellow cop. When Derek stood again to clarify his prior statements, the defense grilled him relentlessly. They pointed out that if Harlan was such a habitual offender, why had Derek waited so long to come forward? Derek's face flushed with shame. "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice trembling. "Afraid of losing my job, afraid of retaliation." Harlan had influence in the department. Some members of the jury seemed to sympathize, while others appeared skeptical. The defense attorney pounced on Derek's reluctance, painting him as an unreliable witness who had participated in a witch hunt. Imani watched anxiously, her heart tightening each time the defense tried to discredit her key witness. Next, the defense tried to spin Imani's own social media activity as evidence of a political agenda. They displayed screenshots of her posts supporting Black Lives Matter, insinuating that she had a bias against the police. But Imani remained calm on the stand, explaining that her support for social justice movements did not invalidate her right to walk home with groceries without being arrested. Still, the defense's aggressive tactics put her on edge. They paraded out a handful of witnesses, mostly fellow officers, who attested to Harlan being a fine cop who always followed protocol. Their testimonies lacked specific details, but were laced with unwavering loyalty. During recess, Imani felt her resolve waver. "What if the jury believes them?" she whispered to Diego. "They're making me out to be some militant activist." Diego placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We have the videos," he reminded her. "We have bystander footage showing you were calm. The jury can see it for themselves." In the corner of the hallway, Judge Darius Langston discreetly observed the tension between Imani's team and Harlan's supporters. It was the age-old clash between those seeking justice and those invested in preserving a broken status quo. Darius had presided over countless trials, but this one bore the weight of so many unspoken stories, so many injustices never brought to light. By the time the defense wrapped up that phase of the trial, they had sown doubt but not certainty. The gallery buzzed with speculation. Reporters outside scrambled to spin the day's developments for the evening news. Some headlines proclaimed Imani's case to be on shaky ground. Others honed in on the videos that contradicted Harlan's version of events. Harlan left the courthouse with a forced smirk, barking at reporters that the truth would prevail and that Imani was a liar. In private, however, he was seething. The once confident officer could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. His attorney had managed to poke holes in Imani's case, but the looming presence of multiple witnesses and video evidence weighed heavily. A silent tension settled over the city as everyone braced for the next wave of revelations. Imani tried to sleep that night but kept tossing and turning, haunted by the defense's insinuations and the possibility that justice might slip away. Meanwhile, Judge Langston pored over legal precedents, determined to keep his courtroom fair and above reproach. The trial was far from over. With each passing phase, new truths would surface. Old lies would be stripped away, and the fate of both Imani and Harlan hung in the balance. Little did anyone know that the biggest surprise was yet to come. An unexpected piece of evidence that would shift the entire narrative and accelerate Harlan's tumble toward a reckoning he could never have imagined. An electric undercurrent ran through the courtroom. Everyone sensed something significant was about to happen. Imani arrived early, her nerves taut as wire, accompanied by Diego, Simone, and a few supporters. Lorraine stayed home, too stressed to witness the trial in person, but glued to the live updates on local news. The prosecution began by calling a tech expert to the stand. This young man, sporting thick glasses and an air of quiet confidence, introduced himself as Miles Bennett, a digital forensic specialist. He announced he had examined body cam footage from the day of Imani's arrest. Instantly, a wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Body cam footage. Imani's arrest video from bystanders had circulated everywhere, but the police footage itself was rumored to be missing or corrupted. Harlan's defense had insisted there was no usable body cam data. Miles calmly explained how the file had been incomplete, but through advanced recovery software he had managed to piece together critical fragments. With the judge's permission, he played the footage. On the screen, a shaky video showed Imani calmly walking, grocery bag in hand, while Harlan demanded her identification. His voice was laced with irritation, but Imani remained polite. Then came the moment he clapped the handcuffs on her. The real shock, though, came after Imani was placed in the patrol car. In the muffled audio from inside Harlan's body cam, one could hear him mutter a racial slur along with comments about teaching her a lesson. The words were undeniable, venomous. Imani felt a chill slice through her as the courtroom collectively gasped. A hush fell so thick one could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Harlan's defense attorney leapt up, objecting fiercely and claiming the audio might be taken out of context, but Judge Langston allowed it, reminding everyone of the forensic expert's credibility. The defense fumbled, trying to downplay Harlan's language as heat-of-the-moment talk, but the damage was done. When the audio ended, Imani looked over at Harlan. He stared at the screen, stunned, his face pale, mouth slightly ajar, as if even he could not believe he had been caught so blatantly. Meanwhile, the gallery rustled with shock and indignation. Miles Bennett stepped down and Diego nodded to Imani. She understood. This was the linchpin of their case, the moment that revealed Harlan's racist intent for all to see. She felt a surge of relief followed by a wave of sorrow. Relief that the truth was out. sorrow that such hatred still existed. Next, the prosecution introduced a series of internal emails obtained via subpoena. They showed Harlan exchanging troubling remarks with a small group of officers, ridiculing black community members in the neighborhood he patrolled. Judge Langston read through them with a stony expression, then allowed them into evidence. The air grew heavy, charged with the inescapable reality that Amani's arrest was not an isolated act, but part of a larger pattern of racism. By midday, the tension in the courtroom was at a fever pitch. Reporters raced to file breaking news updates. The defense looked cornered, trying to salvage Harlan's reputation with pleas of stress-induced speech and misinterpretation, but no one in the room could deny what they had seen and heard. When the session adjourned for lunch, Imani stepped outside for fresh air. Her eyes watered as she looked up at the overcast sky. She felt both validated and profoundly saddened. This was a victory, yes, but it came at the cost of exposing how deep racism could run. Across the hall, Harlan hunched in a corner with his attorney, voice low and urgent. He seemed smaller, as though the bravado had drained out of him. Every so often he glanced over at Imani, a mix of anger and fear etched on his face. Judge Langston remained in his chambers, going over notes and evidence, his jaw tightening whenever he recalled Harlan's hateful words. But he centered himself with the reminder that his role was to ensure justice, not to indulge in personal vendettas. Still, the tide had turned dramatically. The once formidable defense was cracking, battered by the undeniable evidence of Harlan's bigotry. Whispers spread through the courtroom's corridors. This might be it. The day an arrogant, racist cop finally faces the music. The prosecution presented additional evidence, minor but reinforcing the established pattern. Complaints lodged by other citizens about Harlan's conduct, quiet settlements the department had paid out in the past. The courtroom was a crucible of tension, each revelation forging a clearer picture of an officer who had abused his authority for far too long. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Harlan took the stand. Looking visibly shaken, he fidgeted with his tie, eyes darting away from Imani and Judge Langston. His defense attorney guided him through a carefully rehearsed narrative. Harlan expressed regret over his inappropriate words, attributing them to stress and frustration on the job. He tried to maintain a facade of stoicism, but cracks showed. When the prosecution cross-examined him, the pressure intensified. They grilled him on the specifics of Imani's arrest, the body cam footage, and the racist language he used. He stumbled through half-baked justifications, at times contradicting himself. "Is it your testimony, Officer Graves, that you felt you were in danger from a woman carrying a grocery bag?" the prosecutor demanded. Harlan swallowed hard. I thought she might be hiding something." The prosecutor's voice was sharp. "But you had no probable cause, correct?" A brief silence. "I can't speak to that exactly," Harlan finally managed, sweat beading at his temples. In the gallery, Imani watched, her heart pounding so forcefully it felt like each beat echoed in her ears. She exchanged a quick look with Diego, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. Judge Langston, for his part, maintained a calm, measured demeanor, but inside he felt a simmering indignation. Harlan's testimony was riddled with half-truths, and the man refused to take full responsibility. Darius reminded himself to remain impartial, though he could not erase the memory of his own encounter with Harlan years ago. By the time Harlan stepped down from the stand, his defense had done little to salvage his case. He mumbled answers, contradicted evidence, and displayed none of the arrogant confidence that once defined him. The prosecution rested, confident in the damning pile of evidence. Court adjourned with closing arguments set for the following morning. As Imani left, she almost did not recognize the stooped figure of Harlan trudging out a side entrance, flanked by his lawyer. He was a far cry from the boastful cop who had humiliated her on the street. Outside, protesters continued chanting, though the tone felt different now, like a collective realization that real change was possible. Imani and Diego spoke briefly to reporters, reiterating their commitment to seeing this through. Meanwhile, social media erupted with play-by-play accounts, capturing every twist of the trial. At home, Imani sank onto her couch, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She wanted to cry, laugh, shout, so many emotions tangled in her chest. Lorraine hobbled over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good," her mother said softly. "Whatever happens next, you've done more than most people can in a lifetime." Imani sniffed back tears. Mama, I just want this nightmare to end. It will, Lorraine assured her. In one way or another, it will. Across town, Harlan sat in a dingy motel room. He had avoided going home, where a small crowd of reporters still loitered for a quote. His phone buzzed with messages from family and a few supportive colleagues, but he ignored most. He nursed a bottle of liquor, replaying the trial in his mind. Each memory was a fresh wound to his pride. He raged at Imani, at the system, at the city for turning on him. But a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he had done this to himself. He told the voice to shut up, drowned it with more liquor, and stared blankly at the wall until exhaustion swallowed him. Judge Darius Langston drove home in silence, the city lights reflecting off his windshield. He thought about the final phase of the trial, how he would deliver instructions to the jury, and how Imani's fate and Harlan's hinged on their verdict. If ever there was a moment for the scales of justice to balance, it was now. Morning dawned with dark clouds gathering, hinting at rain. A foreboding sign, some might say, but Imani tried not to dwell on omens. She took a seat beside Diego in the courtroom, feeling each tick of the clock reverberate through her. Harlan sat across from her, his usually sharp gaze dulled by lack of sleep. The closing arguments commenced. Diego delivered a powerful, impassioned speech, highlighting the evidence, the body cam footage, and the testimonies. He painted a picture of an officer who systematically abused his power and a young woman who refused to become another statistic. Harlan's defense lawyer did his best to salvage what remained. He tried to cast doubt on Derek's testimony, pointing to the late revelations. He argued that racism, while despicable, was not a crime by itself, and that the jury must focus on the alleged unlawful arrest, not Harlan's bad language. Then Judge Langston instructed the jury, meticulously outlining the legal definitions and the requirements to find Harlan liable for violating Imani's civil rights. His voice was steady, but Imani sensed an undercurrent of urgency, a plea for the jury to see the truth and weigh the facts carefully. And then came the wait. Imani sat in a cramped room with Diego, Simone, and her mother, who had managed to attend the final day. Harlan retreated to another room, occasionally pacing the hallway with a dark scowl. Hours passed as the jury deliberated, sometimes sending out notes asking for clarifications on the evidence. Finally, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom, hearts pounding like a collective drum. The atmosphere was electric, every breath tinged with anticipation. The four persons stood. In the matter of Brooks versus Graves on the count of unlawful arrest and violation of civil rights, we find the defendant. She paused for a moment that stretched like an eternity. Guilty. A sudden burst of exhaled relief filled the room, interspersed with muffled sobs of joy and applause from Imani's supporters. Imani felt her knees go weak. She squeezed Diego's hand, tears streaming down her face. Lorraine wept openly, hugging her daughter. Harlan sat rigid, face drained of color. He looked at the jurors with disbelief, then glared at Imani. His defense attorney leaned in, whispering rapidly, likely discussing an appeal. But the gravity of the guilty verdict hung thick in the air, a clear declaration that this time he would not escape consequences. As Imani stood to leave, the judge called her name. She turned to see him offering a solemn nod. "Justice has been served," he said quietly, though his voice carried a certain resonance. In that moment, Imani recognized that Judge Langston, too, had found some measure of closure. But it was not over. Sentencing and civil penalties would follow. Harlan might face jail time if criminal charges were pursued by the district attorney's office, or at the very least a heavy fine and the loss of his badge. The city was also likely to pay damages to Imani, though no amount of money could erase her trauma. Outside, cameras flashed and microphones appeared like a swarm. Imani bravely spoke. "This verdict isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's been treated like they don't matter. Today, the system showed that we do matter." Across the courtyard, Harlan barreled past reporters, refusing to answer questions. Some shouted, "Do you regret what you did? Are you sorry?" He only grumbled no comment as he disappeared into a waiting car. The crowds erupted into cheers. Some waved banners that read, "Justice for Imani" and "We won't stop fighting." Activists hugged strangers, tears of victory mixing with the drizzle that began to fall. For a fleeting moment, it felt like hope glimmered in the raindrops, like maybe this was the start of a brighter chapter. Inside his chambers, Judge Darius Langston removed his robe, releasing a slow breath. He was aware that this case would likely be appealed, that the struggle was far from over. But for now, a racist officer had been held accountable, and the law had done its job. Darius felt a quiet pride and a final release of the bitterness that had once taken root when Harlan insulted him years ago. In the weeks that followed, life for Imani Brooks changed in both expected and surprising ways. She was hailed as a hero by many, receiving invitations to speak at community events and colleges about her experience. Large crowds came to hear her, hungry for real stories of justice. Imani spoke earnestly about systemic racism, urging people not to view her case as a singular victory, but as a call to address the deeper issues plaguing law enforcement. Financially, Imani was awarded a significant settlement from the city, which she used to help her mother with medical bills and invest in a local nonprofit advocating police reform. She also set aside a portion to pursue further education, determined to become a lawyer herself one day. The dream, once distant, now felt alive with possibility. Diego, lauded for his role in the case, received offers from prominent civil rights organizations, while Simone made headlines for her tireless activism. Their reputations soared, bolstered by the knowledge that they had championed a cause bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, Harlan Graves found his life in shambles. Officially stripped of his badge, he faced additional criminal charges for falsifying arrest records and potential perjury. The district attorney pressed forward with indictments on the evidence Derek had provided, coupled with the body cam footage. Friends he once considered allies abandoned him, wary of being tainted by association. One overcast day, Imani found herself standing in front of the now shuttered police station where she had been booked, a single camera crew trailing her. The city had moved on in many ways, but for Imani, the memory of being thrown behind bars without cause was still vivid. She spoke to the camera about accountability and the power of collective action. Judge Darius Langston watched the segment later that evening. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction that Imani was using her platform to educate and inspire. The case had tested his resolve, forced him to confront personal bias, and in the end reaffirmed his faith in the legal process. Imperfect, but capable of true justice when guided by integrity. Not long after, Imani received an unexpected letter. It came from Derek Shaw, who had resigned from the force, citing moral conflicts. "I'm sorry it took so long," he wrote. "I hope you can understand that fear can paralyze good people. Thank you for standing up when I couldn't." Imani sat at her kitchen table, tears falling onto the page. She felt a pang of empathy for Derek. His testimony had helped secure the verdict, and in turn she hoped he might find peace in his choice to break ranks with the department. In a twist Imani never predicted, her story continued to reverberate. Local politicians proposed reforms, mandatory body cam usage, stricter penalties for officers who violate civil rights, and more rigorous psychological evaluations for new recruits. Public debate raged, but each conversation was a step forward, a step away from the complacency that once enabled officers like Harlan. One evening, Imani found herself speaking at a candlelight vigil for victims of police brutality. The steps of City Hall glowed with flickering flames, each representing a life impacted by injustice. As Imani finished her speech, she noticed a solitary figure lurking at the edge of the crowd. Harlan Graves, thinner, wearing a hooded jacket, looked on with hollow eyes. Their gazes met for a tense moment, and Imani's heart pounded. She almost expected him to sneer or spit out another vile slur, but he simply turned and walked away into the night. She wondered if he would ever grasp the harm he had caused, or if he would carry his hatred with him forever. The next morning, Imani woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Her life had been irrevocably altered, but from the ashes of that injustice, she had found her voice. She was no longer just a victim. She was an agent of change. And the city, once indifferent to stories like hers, now resonated with a demand for accountability. In her bedroom, a journal lay open with a single line scrolled across the page. "When one door closes, another opens." Imani smiled. For her, that door was the path toward becoming a lawyer, ensuring that what happened to her would not happen to someone else. And for Harlan Graves, the door that had once opened so easily, power and privilege, had finally slammed shut. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey of justice, redemption, and the unstoppable power of truth. Imani Brooks' story reminds us that even one person's courage can shine a light into the darkest corners of prejudice. When we stand together, victims, witnesses, and changemakers, We can hold those who abuse authority accountable and shift the course of an entire community. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the power of standing up for what is right, we invite you to be a part of our growing community. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories and fictional dramatizations that champion justice, equality, and human resilience. Your support helps us continue creating content that uplifts, inspires, and sparks the conversations we all need to have. Thank you.